The void remembers its debts. Commander Eva Rostova watched the display, her jaw tight. The survey cutter Stellograph was a mote of light in the Tartarus system, a place of ghosts and scavengers. Before her, the planetoid K-27 bled dust and radiation under the merciless beam of a Rustjack gravity lance. The stakes were simple coalition law against brute force theft. Her ship was outgunned, her crew was on edge, and something ancient slept in the darkness nearby, a metallic sliver of impossible age orbiting the plundered rock. Its sensor profile was a flat line, an utter void that screamed its presence more than any signal. A low chime announced Tactical Officer Jin at her elbow. "Commander, the Rustjacks are hailing us again. Same channel, same vulgarities." He kept his voice steady, but the tension was a coiled wire in the command deck's recycled air. The Stellograph was a vessel of science and enforcement, not war. The 3 Rustjack Maulers arrayed before them were engines of brute demolition. Rostova gave a curt nod. "On screen, Lieutenant. Let's hear the poetry." The face that appeared was scarred and leering, a man who had clearly made his peace with Vacuum's harsh judgment. "Coalition cutter," the voice rasped, distorted by a cheap comms unit. "This is your final warning. Warden Kalen doesn't like observers. Power down your drives and await boarding, or we demonstrate our mining tools on your hull." The threat was plain, unadorned, and entirely credible. The Rustjacks were a plague, stripping worlds of their core resources and leaving fractured husks behind. Rostova met the man's gaze without flinching. "Warden Kalen is in violation of Interstellar Accord 74.3, prohibiting unauthorized gravitic mining in designated frontier territories. He is creating a navigational hazard and destabilizing this system. Power down your illegal operation and submit to inspection." The air was thick with the low hum of the ship's life support, a sound she usually found comforting. Now it felt like a prelude to silence. The warden's face vanished, replaced by the cold star chart. Humanity built its laws on the bones of dead stars. He cut the feed. Commander Jin stated the redundancy, a symptom of his nerves. Rostova's fingers tapped a sequence on her console, bringing up the sensor feed of the orbiting anomaly. It was a long, needle-thin structure of a material that reflected no light and emitted no energy. Legends from the diaspora's early days spoke of such things. They called them arbiters, sentinels, or saint ships. Most dismissed them as myths, ghost stories to frighten pirates. But this one was real, a silent witness to a crime. The ship's AI Pathfinder spoke in the calm, synthesized tones of pure logic. Its voice was a calming whisper from the ceiling emitters. "Commander, my calculations remain unchanged. Our probability of surviving a direct confrontation is 1.7%. The optimal course of action is to record their violations and retreat to the jump gate." Pathfinder was a creature of numbers, its world, a pristine landscape of risk analysis and resource management. It did not understand defiance for the sake of a principle. "Our duty is to enforce the accord." "Pathfinder." Rostova countered, her eyes still on the relic. "We are the law here, however thin our armor may be." She could feel the vibrations through the deck plates as Engineering Chief Barros rerouted power, trying to squeeze more strength from their overwatched shields. A bead of sweat traced a line down her temple. The relic just hung there, a question mark written in the language of impossible physics. A small transport vessel, a civilian prospector, flickered into existence on the long-range display. It was the Dust Devil, a registered asteroid hopper that had been working the outer belt. They were right on the edge of the expanding debris field from the Rustjack operation. "Signal them," Rostova ordered. "Tell them to change course immediately. The warden's recklessness is poisoning this entire gravity well." She watched the tiny icon, a fragile life in a sea of predators. The universe does not reward fairness, but it punishes imbalance. Before Jin could send the warning, a new energy spike flared from the lead Rustjack Mauler. It wasn't aimed at the stellograph. The gravity lance pulsed a focused wave of force that struck a large, unstable asteroid at the edge of the mining zone. The rock, already weakened, fractured violently. A shotgun blast of debris now hurtled directly toward the dust devil. It was a calculated act of murderous indifference, a message to the coalition. "They're boxing us in," Jin yelled, his composure finally cracking. "The prospector is helpless. Impact in 90 seconds. The command deck lights flickered as the ship's systems reacted to the sudden gravitational shear. From a small viewport, a family of 4 looked out from their cramped cockpit, their faces masks of terror broadcast on a civilian channel. The father was shouting. The mother held a small child, their world about to end, because they were inconvenient. "Pathfinder, plot a rescue intercept. Baros, give me everything you have on the maneuvering thrusters. All power from shields." Rostova commanded, her voice cutting through the rising panic. The choice was brutal. Save the civilians and leave themselves utterly exposed, or watch them die and preserve their own slim chance of survival. It wasn't a choice at all. They were coalition. They had a duty. Executing this maneuver will reduce our survival probability to 0.4%. Pathfinder noted, its tone still maddeningly calm. "I advise against this course of action." The AI could not comprehend the weight of the sigil on Rostova's uniform. It was a symbol of protection, of order in the chaos. Sometimes the numbers had to be wrong. A debt is a promise etched in energy and time. "Execute it anyway," Rostova bit out. The stellograph lurched its engines, screaming a protest they were not designed to make. She was thrown against her restraints, the G-forces pressing down, a physical manifestation of her impossible decision. On the main screen, she watched her ship's shield strength plummet to nothing. They were naked in the dark, a fragile shell of metal and conviction. They were a shield for others. They reached the dust devil just as the first wave of debris arrived. The stellograph's hull groaned, peppered by small impacts that sounded like angry fists beating on the door. Warning klaxons blared. A larger piece of rock the size of a fighter struck a glancing blow against their port nacelle. The lights on one side of the deck went out, plunging them into a stark, emergency-lit twilight. "Damage report," Rostova yelled over the alarms. Chief Baros's voice came back strained and breathless. "Port engine shroud is gone. We're venting plasma, but the core is holding. Maneuverability is shot. We're a sitting duck, Commander." He didn't need to say the rest. They had saved the prospector, which was already scrambling away toward the relative safety of open space, but they had spent their future on the act. The 3 Rustjack Maulers began to advance their weapon ports, glowing with malevolent intent. But then something else happened. A new energy signature bloomed on the tactical display, so powerful it eclipsed everything else. It came from the relic. The long, silent sliver of metal began to glow with a soft, internal silver light. A low, resonant hum vibrated through the stellograph's hull, a note so pure and deep it felt like the universe itself was clearing its throat. The impossible object was waking up. It awoke to the cries of an unbalanced scale. A query appeared on every screen, overriding their systems. It was not text. It was a stream of elegant, brutal mathematics. It was a question asked in the language of physics, a demand for an accounting. Pathfinder's synthesized voice filled the deck, a new note of something akin to awe in its tone. Unidentified broadcast. It is a request for a formal declaration of inequity, a legal filing. It is asking. State the account, present the imbalance. Warden Kalen's ships stopped their advance. Their comms channels were a chaotic mess of confusion and fear. They saw the light, felt the vibration. Their attempts to scan the object were met with utter failure. Their sensor beams were simply absorbed without a trace. They fired a low-power laser, a probe of intent. The beam vanished a meter from the relic's surface, consumed by the silent glowing hull. Rostova stared at the alien mathematics, her mind racing. The legends, the ghost stories her grandfather used to tell her about the first expansion fleet. He'd called them the Judges. Not ships of war, but of pure, unassailable law. They didn't fight. They arbitrated. They balanced the books. It's a test, she whispered, the realization dawning on her. It wants to know who is in the right. Jin looked at her, his face pale in the emergency lighting. How do we answer, Commander? With what? The question hung in the air, heavier than any gravity lance. The Rustjacks had spoken with violence and greed. The stellograph had spoken with sacrifice. Now this ancient power was asking for a formal statement, a reason for its intervention. The fate of the system rested on their answer. A teacher does not offer answers, but demands the question be properly formed. They're trying to hack it, Barros reported from engineering his console, showing the Rustjacks' pathetic attempts. Brute force code injection. It's like throwing pebbles at a fortress. On the tactical display, their intrusion programs were represented as red static washing harmlessly against the silver glow of the relic. The ancient ship did not even acknowledge the assault. It was waiting for a different kind of key. Rostova's eyes went to the ship's log. The official record. Pathfinder, compile a data packet. Start with Interstellar Accord 74.3. Itemize every violation committed by Warden Kalen's fleet. Include the illegal gravitic mining, the creation of a navigational hazard, the intentional endangerment of the Dust Devil. Quantify the potential loss of life. Add our own actions as a counter-entry, our warnings, our adherence to protocol, our expenditure of resources to save the civilian vessel. You are attempting to communicate a legal concept to an unknown entity, Pathfinder stated. The hint of awe had been replaced by skepticism. The probability of successful interpretation is infinitesimally small. Its operating system is likely based on axioms we cannot comprehend. The AI was logical. It saw only barriers. Rostova saw the only path forward. It's not asking about our operating system, she retorted, her hands flying across her console, helping Jin format the data. It's asking about our laws. It's a judge, not a computer. We don't need to speak its language. We need to show it our work. She felt a strange certainty settle over her. This was a place of ledgers and laws, not of lasers and shields. They would present their case. The ledger's first entry is always written in ink of sacrifice. The data packet was compiled, a dry, formal document of crimes and corresponding statutes. It was the antithesis of a desperate plea for help. It was a legal brief, cold and precise. It detailed the imbalance in the system, the debt Kalen's actions had incurred against the fabric of interstellar law and safety. At the end, Rostova appended the stellograph's sensor logs, the proof of their sacrifice. Transmit it, she ordered. Use a simple open-source data transfer protocol. No encryption, no pretense. The file was sent. For a moment, nothing happened. The silver glow of the relic remained constant. The Rustjack Maulers, having failed in their attempts to hack it, began to reposition, perhaps to fire on it with their main weapons. Then the relic pulsed. A single blinding flash of silver light that forced everyone on the stellograph's bridge to shield their eyes. When they looked back, the stream of mathematics on their screens was gone. In its place was a single stark symbol. A circle bisected by a perfectly vertical line with a horizontal line crossing its exact center. The ancient sigil of the balance. And beneath it, one word translated into every known dialect of modern humanity simultaneously. It was a verdict. It was an acceptance of their case. The word was recorded. A silence fell over the command deck, a profound stillness that was more shocking than any explosion. The hum from the relic ceased. The internal light faded slightly, becoming a soft, steady thrum of power. It had received their accounting. It had judged it to be true. Now it was going to act. The Rustjacks were about to learn a very old lesson. A mirror cares not for the anger of the face it reflects. Warden Kalen, emboldened by the relic's apparent passivity, gave the order. All ships fire on the unknown target. Full power. Crack it open. He saw a prize, a treasure of lost technology, and he would not be denied by a light show and a strange symbol. The three Rustjack Maulers unleashed their primary weapons. Heavy plasma torpedoes and kinetic slugs tore across the void, a storm of destruction aimed at the heart of the ancient ship. The relic did not raise shields. It did not deploy countermeasures. As the first plasma torpedo approached, a section of the relic's silvery hull shimmered. It became a perfect, flawless mirror. The torpedo struck this surface and did not detonate. It was reflected. Perfectly. It turned 180 degrees and flew back along its exact original trajectory, its own guidance system, now screaming in confusion as it targeted the ship that had launched it. The crew of the first Rustjack Mauler had less than a second to react. Their own weapon, designed to punch through cruiser-grade armor, slammed into their forward command section. The ship blossomed into a silent, expanding cloud of superheated gas and shattered metal. One moment it was a predator. The next it was a pyre. The kinetic slugs, too, were returned to sender, punching clean, neat holes through the second Mauler's engine block. The third Mauler, seeing what was happening, tried to cease fire, but their last volley was already in flight. The relic's mirrored surface shifted, catching the incoming projectiles and sending them back with cold, mathematical precision. The final Rustjack ship was crippled, its spine broken by its own angry fists. The entire battle had lasted less than 10 seconds. Not a single shot had been fired by the relic. It had simply returned what was given. The universe keeps a perfect account of every violence. On the bridge of the stellograph, there was only stunned silence. Jin's mouth was agape. Baros was muttering prayers to the soul of his first engine. Rostova stood firm, her knuckles white where she gripped her console. She had gambled on a myth, and that myth had proven to be terrifyingly real. It had not destroyed the enemy. It had allowed the enemy to destroy themselves with their own aggression. It was the most lawful act of self-defense she had ever witnessed. Pathfinder spoke, its synthesized voice now holding an undeniable current of something new. It was not awe. It was respect. Commander Rostova, I am re-evaluating my threat assessment. The anomaly is not a variable. It is a constant. The AI's logic cores were struggling to process what had happened. An event with a 0% probability had occurred. The rules of the universe as it understood them had just been amended. The relic, its work done, returned to its soft, ambient glow. It sent a new data packet, this time only to the stellograph. It was a copy of the log entry it had made. It listed the Rustjack fleet designated aggressor. It listed the stellograph designated petitioner. And it listed the final disposition, account balanced, sanctions applied. The cold, formal language of a cosmic court. Rostova let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. They were safe. The system was secure, but a new, heavier weight now settled on her shoulders. The relic, the Argent Ledger as the old legends named it, was awake. And by presenting their case by being recognized as petitioner, they had just become inextricably linked to it. They were no longer just a survey cutter. They were the scribes for a god of justice. A single act of justice can rewrite the map of an entire sector. News of the event in Tartarus 7 spread like a shockwave. The destruction of 2 Rustjack Maulers and the crippling of a third by an unknown power was an incident that could not be contained. The stellograph's official report, concise and brutally honest, was met with a mixture of disbelief and frantic interest by by Coalition command. An ancient, automated arbiter ship, one that enforced interstellar law by reflecting an aggressor's own energy back at them. It was the stuff of fantasy. But the sensor logs from the stellograph, the Dust Devil, Fuel, and even the distant Prospector outpost were undeniable. The data was clean. Warden Kalen's surviving crew, picked up from their ruined vessel, told a rambling, terrified story of a ghost ship that turned their own weapons against them. They were laughed out of the initial debriefing until their testimony was found to perfectly match Rostova's report. Within 3 days, Tartarus 7 was no longer a forgotten backwater. It was the single most important location in the sector. A coalition dreadnought, the Indomitable Will, was dispatched, along with a fleet of scientific vessels and legal adjuncts. They came to secure the asset, to study it, and to claim it. They found the stellograph holding a tight, lonely orbit around the silent, glowing form of the Argent Ledger. Rostova had refused to leave. She had a new duty now. The Ledger had accepted her petition. It had acted on her legal filing. She felt a bond, a sense of responsibility that went beyond her coalition directives. The ancient ship had not communicated again, but she could feel its presence, a steady, patient hum at the edge of her senses. It was watching. It was waiting. The law is a shield, but the hand that holds it must be steady. The captain of the Indomitable Will, a pompous, decorated man named Admiral Valerius, was not pleased. He saw the Argent Ledger as a weapon, a supreme advantage to be seized for the coalition. His initial communications with Rostova were condescending, treating her as a junior officer who had stumbled upon a prize far beyond her station. He ordered her to stand down and transfer all data and command authority to his fleet. Commander Rostova, his voice boomed from her comms unit, his face a mask of imperial certainty. You have done well, but your part in this is over. This is now a matter for fleet command. Take your cutter and return to Sector HQ for a full debriefing. We will handle the asset from here. The unspoken message was clear. The adults had arrived to take over the interesting new toy. Rostova stood on her command deck, the image of the Admiral's stern face filling her main screen. The deck of the Indomitable Will was bustling behind him, a stark contrast to her own quiet, scarred bridge. With all due respect, Admiral, she replied, her voice level and firm, the asset is not a piece of salvage. It is an active legal entity. It has already acted to enforce coalition law. I do not believe it will respond favorably to being handled. A flicker of annoyance crossed Valerius's face. Your belief is noted, Commander. Now follow your orders, or do I need to remind you of the consequences of insubordination? The threat was heavy, a cudgel to be used against a subordinate who was forgetting her place. He was a man accustomed to his authority being absolute. He saw the universe in terms of chain of command. This ship teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers. It will never answer to a caller. Pathfinder's synthesized voice cut in a rare interruption. Admiral, my analysis suggests that the entity which I have designated Ledger operates on a principle of legal standing. Commander Rostova established that standing by filing a valid petition. Your arrival does not grant you the same status. You are currently an uninvolved third party. The AI was learning. It was beginning to understand a law that transcended military hierarchy. The Admiral's face hardened into a granite scowl. Is your AI speaking out of turn, Commander? Get it under control. He saw the stellograph not as the petitioner in a legal case, but as an obstacle. He began to maneuver his dreadnought, a massive ship of war, into a closer, more intimidating position relative to the tiny survey cutter. It was a classic power play, a physical demonstration of dominance. Rostova watched the warship's lumbering advance. She knew she was walking a razor's edge. Defying an admiral was a career-ending and possibly life-ending decision. But she looked at the silent silver ship hanging in the void. It had trusted her accounting. It had acted with a terrifying, beautiful precision that honored the very laws she had sworn to uphold. She could not simply hand it over to men who saw it as a bigger gun. "Admiral," she said, her voice ringing with newfound authority. "My ship is not moving. We are here as legal observers. If you attempt to interface with the ledger by force, you will be the one in violation of the law. A counting machine does not care for the rank of the man who breaks the rules." Admiral Valerius laughed, a short, barking sound of disbelief. "Violation. I am the law out here, Commander." He cut the channel. A moment later, a squadron of heavy drones detached from the dreadnought's belly. They were not weaponized, but they were clearly designed for salvage and forced entry. They began to approach the Argent Ledger, their manipulator arms extended, ready to pry open the secrets of the ancient ship. Rostova watched them come, her heart pounding. She had no weapons to stop them. All she had was her conviction. Pathfinder, open a channel to the ledger. Use the same protocol as before. She was taking another gamble, a desperate one. She was hoping that the bond they had formed was real. "On what grounds, Commander?" the AI asked. "We have no new violation to report." "Yes, we do," Rostova said, her eyes fixed on the approaching drones. "The Admiral is attempting to seize a protected legal entity without due process. It's an act of unlawful seizure. File it." Her fingers flew across the console, drafting a new, concise legal brief. It cited coalition regulations on the preservation of unique artifacts and the protocols for first contact with non-human intelligences. She was accusing her own superior officer of breaking the law. The data packet was sent. The drones were now only a few hundred meters from the ledger's silent hull. Just as the lead drone extended a magnetic clamp, the silver ship pulsed again. It was not the blinding flash of before, but a soft, almost gentle wave of light. The drones stopped dead in the void. Their power systems were not damaged, but they were completely inert. Frozen. Then a message came back, not just to the stellograph, but to every ship in the system. It was the same bisected circle sigil. But this time the text beneath it was different. It read, "Petitioner's protective standing affirmed. Third-party interference denied. An account has been opened." On the bridge of the indomitable will, Admiral Valerius stared at his screen, his face a mixture of fury and utter shock. He had been publicly and lawfully rebuked by a machine thousands of years old. Sometimes the most powerful weapon is a properly filed complaint. The stalemate held for 2 days. Admiral Valerius, fuming aboard his dreadnought, could do nothing. Every attempt to approach the ledger was met with the same gentle, implacable shutdown of his drones and probes. The ancient ship had made its position clear. Rostova was the only party with legal standing. The stellograph, scarred and underpowered, was the sole gatekeeper to the most significant discovery in human history. They were the bailiff for the court. Other factions began to arrive. A massive vessel belonging to the xenophobic Signan Concord slipped into the system, its hull a crystalline lattice that shimmered with barely contained power. They hailed no one, simply taking up a watchful position on the system's ecliptic. Then came the scavengers, smaller, faster ships from a dozen different pirate clans and renegade corporations, drawn by the rumors of a priceless artifact circling like vultures at a respectful distance. Tartarus 7 was becoming a powder keg. Rostova's small crew was pushed to its limit. They maintained constant sensor sweeps, fielding endless hails from curious newcomers and politely declining Valerius's increasingly threatening requests for them to stand aside. Chief Barros had managed to patch their port engine, but they were running on fumes and recycled rations. The weight of their new role was immense. They were the only thing standing between a dozen competing agendas and the ancient silent judge. "They're probing us," Jin reported, pointing to a flicker on the tactical map. "The Signans, a tight beam energy scan. Very sophisticated. They're trying to read the ledger's emissions through our ship. It was a subtle, clever move. They were using the stellograph as a lens trying to gain information without triggering the ledger's defensive response. The game was becoming more complex, a multi-sided chess match with unimaginable stakes. A record of debt is a map of future conflict. Rostova knew they couldn't hold this position forever. They were a single point of failure. She needed a way to solidify their standing, to turn their temporary reactive guardianship into something permanent and recognized. The ledger had responded to legal filings. It thought in terms of rules and precedents. She needed to create a new rule. Pathfinder, she said, her voice thoughtful. What is the legal mechanism for establishing a long-term trust or conservatorship over a protected entity? The AI's processors whirred for a moment. Such a mechanism is typically used for the preservation of endangered species or worlds of historical significance. It requires the filing of a charter, a document that outlines the duties and limitations of the conservator. The charter must be ratified by a recognized legal body. It was a long shot, a piece of bureaucratic maneuvering in the face of overwhelming military force. Then let's write a charter, Rostova declared. The idea was audacious. She would draft a legal framework for their relationship with the ledger and ask the ledger itself to ratify it. She would be asking the court to appoint its own bailiff. She and her crew spent the next cycle drafting the document. They called it the Tartarus Mandate. It defined the ledger not as an object to be owned, but as a sovereign legal power. It appointed the commanding officer of the stellograph and their successors as its sole interlocutor, its clerk of court. The document was a masterpiece of legal theory born of desperation and inspiration. It bound the clerk to strict rules of impartiality. They could not use the ledger for personal gain or for the specific advantage of any single faction, including the coalition. Their sole duty was to present valid petitions of inequity for the ledger's judgment. It was a declaration of stewardship, not ownership. It was an act of profound humility. The wisest rulers do not seek power, but instead build a better cage for it. They transmitted the Tartarus Mandate to the Argent Ledger. This time the wait was longer. For a full hour the ancient ship remained silent, its soft silver glow unchanging. On the bridge no one spoke. They had laid all their cards on the table. They had offered not to be its master, but its servant. A servant of the law it embodied. Admiral Valerius, monitoring their transmissions, scoffed at their naivete. He was preparing a full Marine boarding party to seize the stellograph by force, convinced Rostova had finally lost her mind. Then the ledger responded. A beam of pure data, incredibly dense and complex, shot from its hull and washed over the stellograph. It wasn't a message. It was an upgrade. The ship's systems, old and strained, were flooded with new information. Power conduits that were minutes from failing stabilized, their efficiency suddenly tripled. Pathfinder's core programming was rewritten, its processing power expanded 1,000-fold. The ship's sensors, previously limited to a few light minutes, could now see the entire system in perfect real-time detail. Pathfinder's voice came from the speakers, and for the first time it sounded truly, fully alive. There was wonder in its tone. Commander, it has accepted the charter. It has deputized us. The Tartarus Mandate is now an active protocol within my core systems. The ledger has granted us the tools we need to perform our duties as clerk. The AI paused as if processing a revelation. It is not a ship, Commander. It is a library of law, and it has just given us a library card. On the main screen, the bisected circle sigil appeared. It glowed for a moment, and then the image on the stellograph's hull, the old Coalition starbird, was subtly altered. The sigil was now superimposed over it, a new emblem for a new purpose. The survey cutter stellograph was gone. In its place was the office of the clerk of the court for the Argent Ledger. They had become a part of something ancient. A law is only as strong as the will of those who enforce it. Admiral Valerius watched the energy transfer with disbelief his boarding parties halfway to the stellograph. When his sensor officers reported the cutter's systems had been massively upgraded, his disbelief turned to rage. He saw his prize, his key to promotion and glory, slipping through his fingers, empowering a stubborn, idealistic commander and her obsolete vessel. "I don't care what that thing thinks it's doing," he snarled to his first officer. "Proceed with the boarding. Take that ship." The boarding craft accelerated, their engines burning hot. On the stellograph's bridge, Jin's head snapped up. "Commander, boarding parties incoming. They're not bluffing." He began to arm their point defense cannons, a pathetic gesture against military-grade assault craft. Panic began to fray the edges of their newfound confidence. They had the law on their side, but the law had no guns. "It does not need them," Pathfinder stated calmly. The AI, with its newly expanded senses, was seeing things they could not. "The Ledger is acting." Outside, the silent silver ship did nothing. But the space around the stellograph began to warp. Not violently, but subtly, elegantly. A small, localized bubble of distorted space-time formed around the cutter. It was a perfect sphere of gravitic influence. The Coalition boarding craft, moving at high speed, struck this invisible barrier. They did not explode. Their momentum was simply absorbed. They came to a dead stop, their prows wrinkled like a fist punching solid rock. Inside, the Marines were thrown about, bruised and confused but alive. The gravitic bubble was not a wall. It was a cushion. It was the softest, most absolute no in the history of warfare. It was a non-violent, perfectly executed denial of access. Valerius stared at his tactical display, at his immobilized boarding craft, and finally understood. He was not dealing with a weapon he could seize. He was dealing with a power he could not comprehend. He had brought guns to a legal argument, and he had lost. His authority, built on the threat of force, was meaningless here. The Argent Ledger had just set a new precedent, one that would echo through the halls of power for centuries to come. The precedent was simple. The law protects its own. A choice once recorded becomes a destiny. The political fallout was immediate and catastrophic for Admiral Valerius. His attempt to illegally board a fellow coalition vessel, an act publicly and non-lethally thwarted by the very entity he sought to control, was a scandal that command could not ignore. He was recalled in disgrace, his career in ruins. The indomitable will remained in the system, but its new commander had very different orders to assist and protect the clerk of the court. The balance of power had shifted not by force of arms, but by force of law. Rostova found herself in an unimaginable position. She was the sole arbiter of access to the most powerful legal authority ever known. Hails flooded her comms, the Signan Concord offering ancient knowledge in exchange for a judgment against their rivals. Corporate mega-conglomerates seeking to file grievances over stolen patents. Even a representative of a religious cult that believed the Ledger was a god asking her to serve as its high priestess. She refused them all. Her duty, as outlined in the Tartarus mandate she herself had written, was not to solicit cases. It was to receive valid petitions of immediate demonstrable harm and present them for judgment. The Ledger was not a tool for settling old scores or gaining an advantage. It was an emergency brake for the runaway train of galactic injustice. Her first act as official clerk was to file a formal injunction against the remaining scavenger fleets, ordering them to leave the Tartarus system or face sanctions. They vanished within the hour. Life on the newly christened clerkship settled into a new routine. Barros and his engineers worked to understand the new systems the Ledger had gifted them, marveling at technology that seemed to operate without heat or waste. Jin monitored the increasingly crowded system, logging the position and intent of every ship, creating a buffer zone of order around the ledger. Rostova and Pathfinder spent their time studying the few fragments of data the ledger had shared, trying to build a new legal framework around this ancient power. The universe is a vast and lawless place, but it contains pockets of order. One day, a new vessel appeared at the edge of the system. It was small, old, and heavily damaged. It was a refugee ship crammed with families fleeing a civil war in a neighboring system, the Althani sector. They were being pursued by warlords, brutal killers, who had seized power in a bloody coup. The warlords' ships were close behind, broadcasting threats and demanding the refugees be turned over to them for judgment. The lead refugee ship, the Star Wanderer, sent a desperate plea to the Stellograph. "We have nowhere else to go." The captain's voice trembled. "They have slaughtered our leaders and bombed our homes. We seek asylum under the Interstellar Accords." It was a classic tragic story, one that played out a dozen times a year on the lawless frontiers. Usually it ended with the refugees being captured or killed, while the overstretched coalition could do nothing but lodge a protest. Rostova looked at the tactical display. 3 warlord cruisers were closing fast, their weapon signatures flaring. They were pirates and murderers, but they were the de facto government of their sector. Attacking them would be an act of war. The coalition ships in Tartarus were under orders to remain defensive, but the refugees were crying out for justice. Their plea was an imbalance. It was a debt on the cosmic ledger. Pathfinder Rostova said, her voice quiet but firm. "This qualifies. The endangerment of non-combatants. The violation of asylum protocols. It is an ongoing crime." She paused, feeling the immense weight of what she was about to do. She was about to ask this ancient power to intervene in a foreign war. She was escalating things to a level she had never imagined. "Prepare a new petition. We have an account to file." The fate of thousands of innocent lives now rested on her ability to correctly articulate their case to a silent silver god of mathematics and law. The law protects those who cannot protect themselves. The petition was a simple document, stripped of all emotion. It cited the Althani refugees' right to asylum under the Coalition Charter, a right being actively and violently denied by the pursuing warlords. It listed the warlords' vessels, their commanders, and their broadcasted threats as evidence of intent to cause harm. It was a clear and present imbalance, a creditor chasing a debtor with a gun. Rostova appended the Star Wanderer's desperate hail as an affidavit. With a final steadying breath, she authorized the transmission. "File it, Pathfinder." The data stream shot across the void, a silent appeal to the ancient judge. For a moment, the system held its breath. The 3 warlord cruisers, brutal ships of angular iron and exposed weapon systems, did not slow their pursuit. They were sharks that had tasted blood, and the law was just water to them. Their forward plasma cannons began to glow, charging for a killing blow on the refugee convoy's rearmost ship. Then the Argent Ledger acted. It did not flash. It did not create a mirror. Instead, a wave of unseen energy propagated from its hull, a perfect sphere expanding at the speed of light. It was not an attack. It was a declaration. As the sphere washed over the warlord cruisers, their glowing weapon ports dimmed and died. Their engines sputtered, choked, and fell silent. They began to drift their own momentum, their only remaining master. On the bridge of the Stellograph, Jin stared at his tactical display in disbelief. What just happened? Their power readings, they're gone. Not damaged, just nullified. He ran a diagnostic, but the readings were firm. The warlord ships were completely inert islands of dead metal in the vast, uncaring sea of space. The effect was localized, a bubble of influence that extended just a few thousand kilometers around the aggressor fleet. A mirror shows you what you are. A sanctuary shows you what you are not. The ledger sent a new message, broadcast system-wide. The now familiar sigil appeared on every screen from the refugee ships to the Signan Concord's crystalline bridge. The text beneath was a new kind of verdict. Asylum granted. Zone of sanctuary established. Aggression is null within this jurisdiction. It was not a punishment. It was a disarming. The warlords had brought weapons to a place of refuge, and the refuge had simply decreed that weapons did not work there. The refugees, seeing their pursuers rendered impotent, wept with relief. Their convoy limped past the dead cruisers moving toward the protection of the coalition fleet, now stationed near Tartarus 7. The warlords, trapped in their powerless ships, screamed threats and curses over the comms, but their voices were the impotent rage of a disarmed bully. The ledger did not respond to them. Their violent intent had made them irrelevant to the equation. The account was for now balanced. Rostova watched the scene unfold, a profound sense of awe settling over her. This was the true power of the ledger. It was not a weapon of war, but an engine of peace enforced with absolute authority. It didn't destroy its enemies. It removed their ability to be enemies. It created order not by winning a fight, but by ending the possibility of one. She had just witnessed the creation of a perfect, unassailable sanctuary. Pathfinder, she said softly. Begin a continuous scan of the nullification zone. I want to understand the physics of that. Ruling. She needed to comprehend the tools of her new trade. She was the clerk for a court that could literally rewrite the laws of physics to enforce its judgments. The responsibility was staggering. The oldest debts bear the highest interest. In the days that followed, the Tartarus system was transformed. The warlords, after a week of drifting and fuming, were eventually towed away by a coalition salvage crew, their ships impounded. The Althani refugees were processed and given aid, their stories adding to the growing legend of the Arbiter in Tartarus 7. But the most significant development came not from the desperate or the violent, but from the silent, patient watchers. The Signan Concorde made its move. A single small Signan vessel, a crystalline teardrop of a ship, broke from their main fleet and approached the stellograph. It did not hail them with voice or text, but with a formal encoded request for a legal audience sent on a protocol so ancient that Pathfinder had to consult its deepest archives to even translate it. The request was granted. Rostova agreed to meet their envoy. The being that appeared on her screen was not a creature of flesh and blood. It was a composite entity, a shimmering column of light and data that identified itself as Interpreter of Precedent 7. Its voice was a chorus of synthesized tones, perfectly synchronized and devoid of emotion. Clerk Rostova, the entity, began its form subtly shifting. We have observed the function of the entity you call the Argent Ledger. We have analyzed its jurisprudence. We have concluded that it is a court of sufficient standing to hear our claim. What claim? Rostova asked, keeping her own voice steady. She felt a chill crawl up her spine. This was not a plea for help. This was something far older, far more calculated. We wish to file a petition of inequity, the interpreter stated. The claim dates from the dawn of your species' interstellar expansion, 412 of your standard years ago. It is a claim against the entity known as the Human Coalition for the unlawful destruction of a nascent intelligence. We have the records. We have the receipts. The debt is long overdue. A single grain of truth can unbalance the greatest of empires. The command deck of the stellograph fell into a profound silence. Jin stared at the screen, his face ashen. Even the unflappable Chief Barros, listening in from engineering, was speechless. A claim against all of humanity from a species as old and powerful as the Concorde. It was unthinkable. It was a declaration of legal war. Rostova's mind reeled. Her mandate was to be an impartial clerk, Her duty was to file any valid petition. But this struck at the very heart of her identity, her species. "Present your evidence," she said, her voice betraying none of the turmoil she felt. It was all she could do to fall back on the cold comfort of procedure. The Signans did. The data they transmitted was overwhelming in its detail. Star charts from 3 millennia ago, sensor readings from their long-range observation posts. It showed a small, unassuming gas giant in a system humanity had called Kepler 186f. It had been a candidate for early terraforming. But deep within its swirling clouds of ammonia and hydrogen, a complex silicon-based life form was evolving. The Signans had been studying it for centuries, a delicate crystalline intelligence that communicated through intricate patterns of lightning. Humanity, in its youthful, arrogant expansion, had not seen it. Their probes registered nothing but atmospheric static. They had ignited the gas giant using its vast fuel reserves to power the terraforming of the system's other worlds. It was a common practice at the time, a shortcut to building a new home. In doing so, they had, in their ignorance, committed genocide. The Signans had recorded the final silent scream of a dying god made of lightning and crystal. A debt of ignorance is still a debt. Rostova reviewed the data with Pathfinder. The AI, with its new ledger-enhanced systems, cross-referenced the Signan records with humanity's own archives. The findings were irrefutable. The logs of the early colony ships matched. The timelines matched. The energy readings matched. Humanity was guilty. They had not acted out of malice, but out of a failure to see. The result was the same. An intelligence had been extinguished. A cosmic balance had been broken. "Pathfinder, what is the potential liability?" Rostova asked, her voice a near whisper. The AI was silent for a long moment. The concept of liability is difficult to quantify for the destruction of an entire, unique intelligence. However, based on Signan legal precedent, which is the only available metric, the reparations would be catastrophic. They could lawfully claim a tithe of all coalition resources for the next 1,000 years. They could demand entire star systems be ceded to them as compensation. The economic and political upheaval would shatter the coalition. It would be an end to human sovereignty as we know it. Jin slammed his fist on his console. "It's a trick. They've been holding on to this for centuries, waiting for a weapon to use against us. You can't file this, Commander. Your duty is to the coalition first." His words were a raw plea, an appeal to tribal loyalty over abstract principle. For a moment, Rostova was tempted to agree. She could bury the petition. She could claim the evidence was inconclusive. Who would know? But she would know. And the ledger she suspected would also know. Its power came from its impartiality. If she, its clerk, began to filter the petitions based on her own biases, the entire system would be corrupted. The law would become a weapon again, just as Valerius and the warlords had tried to make it. She looked at the sigil on her screen, the perfect, unwavering line of balance. Her choice was clear. It was also impossible. The law demands a price from its servants as well as its subjects. My duty is to the mandate. Rostova said, her voice hollow. The mandate, I wrote. It requires me to be an impartial administrator of the law. The Signan claim is supported by evidence. It is a valid petition. She turned to face her crew, her family. I have to file it. She could see the betrayal in Jin's eyes, the fear in Barros's. She was choosing a cold, alien principle over the survival of her own people. Commander, please, Jin begged. Think about what this will do. Our homes, our families, everything we've ever known. You would sacrifice it all for them. He pointed a trembling finger at the shimmering image of the Signan interpreter. The interpreter remained silent, its form impassive. It had presented its case. The actions of the court were now beyond its control. It was a test, Rostova realized, not just of humanity's past guilt, but of her present integrity. Could she serve the law even when it judged her own kind? It was the ultimate question of stewardship. With a heavy heart and a hand that felt like it was carved from lead, she formally drafted the petition. Petitioner, the Signon Concord. Respondent, the Human Coalition. Charge unlawful termination of nascent intelligence. She appended the mountains of evidence. She took one last look at the faces of her crew, then at the silent silver form of the ledger hanging in the void outside her ship. Then she sent it. The most important legal document in human history, filed by a human who had just signed a potential death warrant for her entire civilization. A ruling is not an end, but the forging of a new beginning. The response was not immediate. The ledger seemed to be taking its time processing a claim that spanned millennia and weighed the soul of a species. For 3 full days, the system was locked in a tense, silent vigil. The coalition fleet, informed of the petition, waited in horrified anticipation. The Signons waited in patient certainty. Rostova did not sleep. She watched the ledger, waiting for the verdict that would define the future. On the 3rd day it came. A single powerful pulse of data directed at every ship, every station, every colony in known space. The sigil of the balance appeared, and beneath it, the judgment. It was not a demand for resources or territory. It was something far stranger, far more profound. The debt is acknowledged, the verdict read. A life was taken in ignorance. A life must be given in knowledge. The respondent. The human coalition is hereby sentenced to a geas of restoration. In the barren system of Cygnus X1, the petitioner holds a world of potential, but lacks the biological spark for creation. The respondent will provide that spark. The judgment continued, laying out the terms in excruciating detail. Humanity was not to pay a tithe of gold or ships. They were to pay a tithe of life. They were ordered to undertake the largest, most complex terraforming and seeding project in history. They were to take a dead world chosen by the Signons and bring it to vibrant, complex biological life. It was a task that would take centuries, requiring the combined efforts of humanity's best scientists, engineers, and xenobotanists. They were not being punished with poverty. They were being sentenced to create. A mirror can reflect the future as well as the past. Furthermore, the project was to be a joint venture. The Signons, masters of inorganic systems and energy, would provide the power and the raw materials. Humanity, masters of chaotic, messy biology, would profit. Though genetic codes, the ecosystems, the spark of life itself. The two species, ancient rivals, were now bound together in a centuries-long act of creation. They were being forced to become partners. The ledger had not passed a sentence. It had created a covenant. On the bridge of the stellograph, there was stunned silence followed by a slow, collective exhale. It was a heavy burden, a task for generations yet unborn. But it was not destruction. It was not submission. It was a chance for redemption written on a galactic scale. Jin looked from the verdict to Rostova, his eyes filled with a new, profound respect. She had not betrayed them. She had forced them to face the truth, and in doing so had opened the door to a future he could never have imagined. The Signon interpreter reappeared on their screen. "The judgment is elegant," the chorus of voices said. There was a new tone in its voice, something that might have been surprise. "The ledger does not punish. It corrects. We accept the verdict. The partnership will begin at once." The ancient patient legalists had gotten their justice, but it was a justice that created rather than destroyed. The debt was to be repaid not with treasure, but with a garden. The Tartarus system was now cemented as the legal capital of the galaxy. The ledger's reputation was absolute. It was not a weapon to be feared or a tool to be used, but a constant, a fundamental principle of the universe. And Eva Rostova, the commander of a simple survey cutter, was its eternally burdened, eternally necessary servant. The work of justice is never truly finished. In the years that followed, the stellograph remained in its lonely orbit, a silent, watchful guardian. Rostova and her crew accepted their new lives. They were no longer explorers or soldiers. They were clerks, scribes, and bailiffs for the highest court in existence. Petitions continued to arrive from the great and the small. A corporation filing an injunction against a rival for industrial espionage. A colony world accusing its neighbor of water theft. A single individual farmer on a forgotten moon filing a claim against a local official for seizing his land. Each valid claim was filed. Each was judged. The ledger's verdicts were always the same, precise, impartial, and utterly creatively just. It never ordered violence. It never demanded retribution. It balanced the scales always in a way that left both parties whole, if not always happy. It rewrote contracts. It created partnerships. It returned what was stolen, and where that was not possible, it commanded that something new be built in its place. It was teaching the galaxy a new definition of law. Rostova aged in her command chair. Her hair grayed. Her crew was eventually rotated out, replaced by a new generation of legal scholars and procedural experts who had trained their entire lives for the honor of serving as clerks of the court. But Rostova remained. She was the first. She was the one who had understood. The bond between her and the ledger was unique, a silent understanding that transcended words. One evening, staring out at the silver needle of the ship against the endless night, the elderly Commander Rostova felt the familiar hum of the ledger resonate deep in her bones. A new file appeared on her console, a simple request for arbitration from a pair of feuding scientific outposts over the rights to a newly discovered comet. It was a small, insignificant dispute in the grand scheme of things, but the law did not care for scale. The law cared only for the balance. The bisected circle of the ledger's sigil on her console blinked once, a soft silver light in the dim command deck, awaiting her action. The universe is a place of infinite chaos, but the ledger must always be balanced. It is a promise made not of words, but of numbers. A debt recorded is a future claimed. We do not punish, we correct. We do not avenge, we account. It is the long, patient, endless work of turning the void into a foundation, one entry at a time. The scales must be true, for they weigh the souls of stars. All debts will be paid,